The yell brought Silas Whitmore to a halt. It wasn't the bawling of a frightened animal or the chilling howl of a coyote. This was human, raspy, desperate, and laced with fear. It ripped through the morning air like a knife. He let the fence post he had been towing fall to the ground and grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the barn. The noise had originated in the east pasture, close to the big oak where the land sloped toward Miller's Creek. Silas had toiled this ranch for 8 years, and nothing good ever came after a scream at daybreak. His boots kicked up the parched earth as he ran across the fields. The September sun was only just starting to rise over the hills, casting long shadows across the grasslands. A further cry came, this time weaker, dying away, as if its origin was weakening. He arrived at the bend beside the creek and skidded to a stop. There, tied to a fence post with heavy rope, was a girl, no more than 16. Her dress was ripped, her dark hair matted and streaked with blood. But it was her eyes that hit him hardest, wide with terror but burning with a hot animal anger. She gazed up at him, quiet, measuring. She was thinking, considering whether he was a danger or a lifeline. Out here, that sort of thinking kept you alive. Silas came in slow, rifle down but at the ready. The ropes cut deep into her wrists, blood saturating the hemp where she'd struggled. Her voice was a rasp, hoarse and distinct. "You with them?" Silas shook his head and laid down the rifle. "No, miss. I'm cutting you loose." As his blade cut through the restraints, he saw the particulars that didn't align. Her dress, though dirty and ripped, was of quality material, something a rancher's daughter would never wear. Her hands, now scraped and bloody, were smooth under the dirt. No calluses, no work marks. This girl wasn't from any homestead around. When the ropes dropped, she attempted to stand, but her legs buckled. Silas caught her just before she landed, and that was when he saw it. Around her neck was a gold locket, dainty and recognizable. Not only recognizable, he'd seen it before. In the painting over his fireplace, her eyes met his again, burning with something deeper than fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but before the words could come, hoofbeats thundered across the pasture. Trouble was coming fast. Silas pulled her up and hurried along, half dragging her behind the big oak. She stumbled but kept up, her endurance a shock given how beat up she was. Through the morning haze, 3 riders rode over the ridge. Even from far away, Silas could tell the truth of them. They weren't coming for a friendly visit. They rode upright in their saddles, the manner of wolves on horseback if wolves could ride, watchful, quiet, deliberate. Hunting. The girl pressed herself hard against the oak bark, her breathing thin. When she talked again, her words carried a gravity beyond her years. "They're Garrett's men. They're the ones who kidnapped me." Silas blinked through the leaves. The man in the middle had a black hat on, casting a shadow across his face. The others stood on either side of him, hands lying easily on their holsters. These weren't wanderers. These were professionals, men who navigated life without touching consequence. "Why would they take you?" Silas whispered. The girl turned to him. There was something different in her eyes now. Not only fear, but recognition. "Don't you know who I am?" one of the riders yelled before he could respond. Those cut ropes had been discovered. The black-hatted man swung down off his horse, knelt at the post, and ran his fingers over the sticky, bloodied hemp as if reading it. The girl tensed beside Silas, her grip on his arm tightening until it hurt. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered. The way her lips shaped his name froze him in place. How did she know he was Mr. Whitmore? Then the black-clad man stood up straight and shouted, his voice ringing across the open ground. "Silas Whitmore, I see you out there. You have something that belongs to Mr. Garrett. He wants it returned." Silas's mind whirled. He'd never known a Garrett, but out here, the worst names were the ones good men wouldn't speak aloud. "Please," the girl breathed, "don't let them return me. You don't know what's at risk." Then she spoke words that blew the ground out from under him. This ranch, my father owned it, Harrison Caldwell, and they murdered him for it. Silas stood stock still. Harrison Caldwell, the name carved on a headstone out back. The man who was said to have died childless, the man whose property Silas had purchased for pennies 8 years before. And now this girl, battered, bleeding, looking at him with Caldwell's eyes, was saying she was his daughter. That can't be done, he groaned. But the past flooded in. The anxious lawyer perspiring at the collar, the lost papers, the ridiculously cheap price. Stuff that made no sense then. But now, the girl, Evangeline, she introduced herself, dug into her dress and produced the locket. With trembling fingers, she opened it. A worn photograph of a man with gentle eyes, standing next to a woman holding a baby. "That's my father," she replied, "and my mother. She died when I was 3. Papa always said this land would be mine one day. Said it's in his will, in a bank vault in Millbrook." Silas glared at the photograph, then at her. The resemblance was unmistakable. She was Caldwell's daughter, and that made everything he thought he owned dripping with a lie. The horsemen were closing in now. Silas could see the black-hatted man telling the others to spread out. They had minutes at most. "Why now?" Silas demanded. "Where were you for 8 years?" Evangeline's eyes flashed with anger. "Papa sent me to San Francisco to my aunt when the threats began. Told me it wasn't safe anymore. I didn't even know he was dead until 3 months ago. Aunt Margaret told me all about it, right before she passed. It all added up. Valuable property, a rancher who wouldn't sell, pressure, threats, a death too convenient, and an absent heir. "So you came back to claim it," Silas said. She nodded. "I went to a lawyer, but Garrett's men reached me, told me if I attempted to exercise my rights, I'd be gone forever." A branch cracked. One of the riders was now less than 50 yards out, riding through the creek bed. Silas glanced at the girl sitting next to him, Evangeline Caldwell, the rightful owner of the land he'd made his home. She was battered, pursued, and looking up at him like the rest of her existence depended on his decision. He had options. Turn her in and maintain the life he'd constructed, or save it and forfeit all. But gazing into her eyes, her father's eyes, Silas knew there was no actual decision to make. He grasped her hand. "Can you run?" She nodded, and side by side they ran from the shelter of the oak, racing toward the rocky outcropping by the creek. Shouts echoed behind them as the riders pursued them. Hooves thundered across the pasture. But in the rock ahead, horses would not come so easily. They had a chance, a slim one, but it was all that mattered. They approached the rocks when a gunshot shattered the morning quiet. The bullet hit a boulder inches from Silas's head, splintering stone. Evangeline didn't blink. She shifted with the survival reaction of a person who knew that hesitation would kill. "This way," Silas panted, guiding her through a skinny slot between 2 great slabs of granite. He knew every turn and incline of this terrain, had tramped it, labored it, shed blood on it for 8 years. Garrett's men could bring guns, but this terrain belonged to him. They came out the other side to encounter a precipitous fall, 15 feet down into the turbulent waters of Miller's Creek. The water was swollen from rain, foaming over slick rocks below. Too far away to jump without injury, but going back meant walking into bullets. Evangeline looked at the water, and then at Silas. "How do you swim?" Before he could respond, she was already making her way down the rock face, holding on to roots and ledges as if she'd grown up in untamed country. Silas trailed behind, amazed by her determination. They splashed into the water together. Cold punched the breath from his lungs. The creek moved faster and deeper than it appeared, and the current struggled to pull them down. But Evangeline, swimming with fierce intent, cut through the water until they hit the opposite bank, shaken, soaked, but alive. Behind the rocks, they heard muffled imprecations. Their pursuers had lost the way. "They'll come around," Evangeline said, squeezing water out of her hair. "Garrett doesn't give an inch." Silas took a deep breath, gazing at this girl who'd flipped his life upside down. She was little more than a child, but had the fire and determination of a woman 10 years older. And she was defying a man whose reach was county-wide. "Tell me about Garrett," he said. "Why does he need this land so badly?" Her teeth locked. "Marcus Garrett holds half the land through bargains drenched in blood and deception. He coveted my father's property for the water rights. With this ranch, he could dictate every drop from here to the Colorado border, strangle every rancher into submission. It was logical now. Water in this parched country was power, more valuable than gold. The person who held it held everything. So he murdered your father," Silas growled. "Not only killed, erased," she said. "And when I returned, it wasn't only the land that I had to fight for, it was my life. If you were standing in Silas's shoes, would you give up everything you've worked for to assist a girl in regaining what is rightfully hers, or attempt to defend her without giving up everything you have?" For what Silas did next would change the course of both their lives. A distant rumble caught their attention. Wagon wheels, not hooves. Evangeline's sudden gasp informed Silas it wasn't a rescue, but as the wagon rumbled from the line of trees, it wasn't what he anticipated. An aged woman in a worn blue frock sat holding the reins, leading two fatigued mules with masterful precision. Her silver hair was tied back in a tight bun, and her face carried the weight of one who'd survived tougher times than most could conceive. Evangeline sprang up from behind the creek bank. "Mrs. Henley, over here!" The woman's eyes flashed onto them, shifting from relief to stern urgency. She stopped the wagon at the waterline with practiced ease. "Evangeline Caldwell," she said, voice spiced with both affection and warning. "Do you know the tempest you've caused by returning?" Silas blinked, taken aback by the sudden familiarity. "You know her?" "She was my father's housekeeper," Evangeline said, assisting the older woman from the wagon. "She's the one who sent a message to San Francisco when he died." Martha Henley's eyes took in Silas, her face impossible to read. "So you're the fellow who's been staying in Harrison's place. I always figured this day would arrive eventually." The words sting like a slap. "You knew she was alive?" Silas asked. "Of course I knew," Martha snapped. "You think an old woman such as myself would not keep tabs on Harrison's only child? But to know and to be able to prevent what happened, those are two different matters." She pulled a worn leather satchel from the wagon and handed it over to Evangeline gingerly. "When Garrett's men took her yesterday, I realized I could no longer hide the truth." Silas's voice was strained. "What truth?" Martha unzipped the satchel and pulled out a thick, wax-sealed paper. "Your true inheritance, child. Harrison's final will, the one Garrett attempted to burn. This confirms the land. Each pasture, each barn, each drop of water is yours." Evangeline accepted it in shaking hands. Silas caught the first glimpse of the little girl. She was still, under all the grit. But Martha wasn't done. "Your father left more than the ranch. He kept records. Every crooked deal Garrett made, every dead rancher, enough to hang him 10 times. Then came the sound they'd all been dreading, hoofbeats close and getting closer. Martha climbed back onto the wagon with surprising speed. "Get in. We're finishing what your father started. But first, we ride for Millbrook before Garrett realizes what's in this satchel." They looked in through the window, but as they drove away, Silas glanced back and stopped cold. A single figure on a black horse stood on the ridge, motionless as a statue, spyglass to eye. From far away, Silas could sense the malice that seemed to radiate off him. Martha paled. "That's Marcus Garrett himself. If he's here, he's not playing games." She cracked the reins and the mules jolted forward. The wagon rattled across the rough ground faster than Silas thought it could move, but behind them Garrett's men gave chase, and their horses were gaining. "There's a reason he came himself," Martha shouted over the chaos. "He knows what's in that bag. Someone's been talking." Evangeline clutched the satchel to her chest. "Who else knew?" "3 individuals," Martha yelled. "Myself, the Millbrook banker who has the key, and—" Her face went white. "God, the lawyer." Silas's gut hit the ground. "The fellow who sold me the ranch." "Thomas Crawford," Martha spat. "That snake has been in Garrett's back pocket for years. When Evangeline retained him, he probably went directly to Garrett." A shot went off behind them. The tailgate of the wagon burst. Garrett's men were close enough to begin shooting. One shot, and this would be over before they even reached town. Then Evangeline stood in the rolling wagon, wheeled around, and screamed with an anger that stilled the valley. "Marcus Garrett, you killed my father, but you won't kill me." Her voice sounded like a war cry. Even the horses in their wake hesitated. Garrett lifted a hand and the firing ceased. In the moment's silence, his voice sliced through the gusts. "Miss Caldwell, you possess something that is mine. Return it, and I'll let you go with your life." Evangeline's response was a pistol pulled from the satchel. She pointed it directly at him. "The only thing I have that is yours is a bullet with your name on it." Martha grinned fiercely. "That's Harrison's girl, all right. All fire and no sense." But Silas noticed what they hadn't. The pursuit had swung in a wide circle, and now they were headed directly into a box canyon. He spun to Martha, urgency building. "Mrs. Henley, we need to turn, now." She looked where he did and swore like a soldier. The walls of the canyon rose before them, high and unforgiving. Rock on 3 sides. No way out. Marcus Garrett hadn't arrived to catch up with them. He'd arrived to trap them. The wagon rattled into the canyon, and Garrett's men took up stations along the ridge, rifles pointed down. It was a flawless trap. No cover, no escape. The wagon groaned to a halt in the middle of the rock basin, now an arena of death. Garrett came down from the canyon mouth at a steady rate, the brim of his black hat hiding a face as hard as stone. His voice was smooth, almost soft when he spoke, and that only made it more deadly. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "you're young, so maybe you don't know how things are done in the real world. That will you're holding, those papers, they're forgeries. Good ones, I'll give you that. But false." Evangeline did not shift. The gun in her hands did not falter. "They are real, and you know it, just as you would know you murdered my father and took his land." Garrett flashed a smile as cold as steel. "Your father had a heart attack. Natural causes. The doctor told me so." "A doctor you paid?" Martha shouted from the wagon. Garrett shrugged his shoulders. "Perhaps, but who is left to debate? A dotty old lady with fables? Or maybe Mr. Whitmore himself, who has been dwelling on stolen ground for 8 years. His trap wasn't constructed of rifles and rock alone. It was constructed out of lies, legal jockeying, and moral pressure. Everyone who could have possibly told the truth was dead, bribed, or bought. Everyone but a 15-year-old girl standing with her father's will in her hand, facing more courage than most adult men. Silas glanced up at the rifles, then across at Garrett's lipless grin, and stepped forward, standing between the girl and Garrett's horse. "You are right in one thing," he said. "I've owned land that didn't belong to me, but I didn't know it was taken when I purchased it. Now I know it, and that makes all the difference." Garrett's smile flickered. "You're a pragmatic man, Whitmore. Walk away and the ranch is yours. Hell, I'll even toss in the water rights to the north. Just forget about this girl." It was a proposition that could tempt any man. Wealth, security, liberty. But Silas replied with no hesitation. "No." The single word shattered the silence like thunder. Garrett's face darkened, and his men edged nervously overhead. "That's a pity," he growled. "I wished we could have resolved this like civilized gentlemen." That was when Martha Henley got to her feet. In one hand, a match. In the other, a stick of dynamite. Garrett's horse leapt back at the sight. "Civilized men don't kill children," she stated. "Harrison showed me how to handle dynamite when the Apaches were raiding. One spark, and I set half this canyon coming down on us." The standoff was in a kind of lock. Garrett's men could not shoot without endangering the explosion. Martha could not light the fuse without killing herself and all the others within the blast zone. It was a lethal standoff. "You're bluffing," said Garrett. But there was a tremble in his voice. Martha's face remained impassive. "I'm 73 years old. I've buried 2 husbands, 3 children, and more friends than I care to count. You think I'm afraid to die as long as it's for justice?" Evangeline took her cue and opened the will. Her voice resonated across the stone. "I, Harrison Caldwell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave all my earthly possessions to my beloved daughter, Evangeline Marie Caldwell." Every word sounded like a nail in Garrett's coffin. Legal, binding, irrefutable. His well-designed deceptions started crumbling. But Garrett was not finished. He had one more card to play. He dipped his hand into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. "Persuasive, Miss Caldwell, but this may prove of greater interest." He brandished a second piece of paper. "A confession, in your father's handwriting, confessing he forged the will himself and gave everything to me." Evangeline's face blanched. Even from Silas's position, the signature seemed close enough to be authentic. If others took it for real, it would destroy her argument. Garrett inched forward, goading. "Documents get lost, accidents occur. Hand over what I want, and perhaps this confession goes away, too." Silas hoped for a second that she would break. Anybody would be intimidated, much less a teenager. But then she smiled. "You're wrong, Mr. Garrett," she said, calm as a rock. "My father was left-handed, always signed with his left, because he broke his right wrist in a fall off a horse when I was 7. She held up the authentic will. "This one slopes to the left. Yours," she gestured at his document, "slopes to the right. Forged by someone who never knew my father." Garrett's face darkened, his mask slipped. "You smart little—" But he never completed the sentence. Galloping hooves echoed through the canyon. Not Garrett's men. These were from the opposite direction. Sheriff William Torres arrived at the front of 6 deputies, and behind him a serious-looking man in a black suit, clearly a federal marshal. Rifles swept the rim of the canyon. Garrett's men were encircled. Martha lowered the dynamite and smiled. "I sent word to Sheriff Torres yesterday, told him to give us till noon." The lawmen surrounded the outlaws. Sheriff Torres approached, badge gleaming. "Marcus Garrett, you're under arrest for the murder of Harrison Caldwell, conspiracy, fraud, and the abduction of a minor." The marshal accepted the will from Evangeline and read it. "We've been tracking Garrett's syndicate for 2 years. This is just what we needed." Garrett watched his universe falling apart and drew his pistol. Silas acted quicker. 8 years of life on the frontier had quickened his reflexes to a fine edge, and his fist came down clean across Garrett's jaw. The man fell from his horse unconscious. As the deputies disarmed the rest of Garrett's men, Evangeline walked over to Silas, the original will still clutched in her hands. "Looks like you'll need to find a new place to live." Silas gave a quiet nod. "I guess so. 8 years is a long time, but it was never really mine." Evangeline regarded him steadily, her eyes calm but firm. "The ranch is more than a man can handle alone, and I don't know the first thing about cattle or irrigation or running hands. I could use a partner." Someone honest, someone who knows the land. He scowled. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we go 50-50. You show me how to work the ranch. I'll ensure the paperwork's on the level this time. Silas gazed out at the land, acres of dust, sky, and obstinate roots. The land he loved. It would no longer be his, but perhaps that wasn't the issue. He held out his hand. Miss Caldwell, I believe you've got a deal. 3 months on, the Caldwell-Whitmore ranch flourished. Evangeline, hot-headed and quick-witted, revitalized the land. Silas's weathered hands stabilized it. Marcus Garrett spent 25 years in territorial prison. His empire lost. What had started with blood and deception had been taken back in bravery and honesty. Sometimes justice isn't served with a gun. It's served with doing what's right, even if it takes everything you have. Now click the next video. The tale that awaits there isn't something you tell. It's something you sense. And when it is finished, you won't remain the same. Click now.